There had to be, by definition, something in the endless void of the spirit. The answer is the Creator God, the One.
And how would God himself come to be? You speak of him as the original mind and original thought, and how he himself had to exist in the endless void of the spirit. But how would he come to be? If there was nothing before him, then how would God come to be? You call him the Creator, but who created him if there was nothing before him?
Now we go into the realm of the unknowable. You are asking me, a mortal, to explain the origins of a God, an inconceivable being who is beyond my comprehension. To speculate on the creation of God is impossible to even begin to tackle.
I thought there was nothing that God could not do. Is God not all-powerful? I've always heard believers proclaim that their God can do anything. How could it be impossible for you to speculate on the creation of God? Does anyone know God's origins, or was he truly made from nothing? If you do not know, is it not possible, therefore, that your whole idea of the spiritual world is a falsehood, merely wishful thinking and fantasy?
You have misunderstood. When we say God can do anything, we mean that God has no limitations, not that he can literally do anything. There is a significant difference. God cannot do anything illogical or impossible, for even God is bound by the logic of the universe. As for any speculation on the origins of God, it is foolish. We mere mortals are incapable of comprehending an incomprehensible being such as God.
So, to clarify, you do not know where God came from. You do not know the origins of the universe or how either began. You only have faith and belief that they exist, but that you cannot prove either, as they are ineffable. Am I understanding you correctly?
Yes, you understand me correctly. I understand you may see this as proof of my beliefs as false, but I view it differently. For I cannot prove a spiritual world to a mind that is only tuned to the physical. And so, when I am unable to provide evidence, you may feel smug in your disbelief. However, understand that this is no fault of mine. Simply your brain being tuned to the physical world, and thus unable to receive the spiritual.
I do believe that you believe in the things you say, but I think that it is incorrect to believe that the physical and spiritual world cannot overlap, or that one is separate from the other. Even you yourself are proof of that. You are flesh and blood. If the material and spiritual really were as separate as you seem to think, then you yourself would not be possible. You can argue all that you want that the human body is a physical construct, but your mind is as much a part of the spiritual world as it is of the physical, no?
Exactly. The physical is a vessel by which the spiritual interacts with the material. Even as a human myself, I am still simply a vessel of spirit that is interacting with reality. However, my spirit does not need my body, nor even a human body, in order to exist.
If your spirit does not need your body, nor even a human body, in order to exist, then why do you, a man of spirit, have human body to begin with? Why do you not simply exist in your spiritual state as a being? Why do you have flesh and blood?
Now this is a very good question, my friend. It is simple. I did not always have a human body. I have had many previous incarnations as human and as something else. However, the human body is a wonderful vessel to experience feeling with. The experience of touch and pain, of pleasure and passion, is not something to be lightly discarded.
So if I am understanding you correctly, then you are saying that this human body is a vessel that we spirits use to experience emotion with, particularly emotions such as pleasure and pain. You say that this body is a wonderful vessel, but I would disagree. Human bodies are not wonderful, they are imperfect. Would human spirits not be perfect in and of themselves, so we would not need a vessel to feel?
You have misunderstood. Human bodies are not perfect. They are flawed in various imperfect ways. However, the human body is wonderful, for it allows spirits to feel both pleasure and pain. To deny suffering is to deny pleasure. Without pain, there can be no pleasure, for how would we recognize one without the other?
You say that without pain there can be no pleasure, which is true, but you seem to be ignoring that pain is not good in and of itself. You say that in order to experience pleasure, human spirits must experience pain as well, which is true, because there is no light without dark. But to say that pain and suffering are not bad things is foolish. To say that human bodies are wonderful and not terrible is foolish, is it not?
Yes and no. While the human body in and of itself may not be perfect, it is beautiful. To suffer and feel pain are horrible things to be sure, but they also serve as teachers. How are we to know pleasure if we do not suffer? We grow as spirits due to suffering we experience.
Pain and suffering may lead to wisdom, and so suffering may lead to pleasure, but to say that pain and suffering in and of themselves are good is to say that children being born with cancer is a good thing. That people starving to death, people being tortured, people being raped and murdered, those things are good things. If suffering is so good, why do people pray to be free from it? Why do you yourself not choose to suffer if suffering is so good? Surely you do not pray to be free of suffering if it is in fact good?
No, the pain and suffering of an individual is not a positive thing, but it can lead to something positive, and as such, even the suffering is not without purpose. However, the human world is not perfect, nor is it supposed to be. This is a place of growth and suffering, a place to experience and learn. You are correct. I myself do not pray to suffer, but I do pray to be stronger.
It is certainly true that suffering can lead to something positive, but your assertion was that suffering in and of itself is beautiful and wonderful, not that suffering can lead to something positive. This is an important distinction. Are you going to stand by your assertion that pain in and of itself is beautiful and wonderful? A child with cancer or a man being tortured for his political beliefs, these things in and of themselves are good and beautiful according to you?
You speak the truth and I stand corrected. I will rephrase. Pain and suffering are not positive things, but they can lead to something positive. I stand firm in my statement to say that if you view the whole and not only the individual, that yes, those things, even pain, can lead to something positive and thus can be beautiful. However, my view of the matter is perhaps skewed as a spirit, seeing things from a broad perspective.
You are correct, suffering can lead to something positive, and I never said that they cannot. But pain in and of itself is not something that is beautiful or good. Pain is simply pain. To say anything more is foolish and ignorant, and it is easy for you to say that as a spirit. But if you were actually a human living in suffering, you would not be singing such praises to pain. That is because there is no suffering in the spiritual. Is that correct?
But I have known suffering as a human and as something more. You are right though, the spiritual world does not suffer. There is no pain, there is no suffering, for the spiritual is limitless, and thus suffering and all the other physical sensations are meaningless.
This is exactly what I've been saying. The spiritual itself cannot and does not suffer, but the physical body suffers immensely, and all the while you and other spiritualists claim that it is a gift from a caring God. You yourself say that there is no suffering in the spiritual, only in the material. So why does this spiritual God create the physical body in which there is suffering in order to feel pleasure?
Yes, you are correct. But suffering, while it is unpleasant, is beneficial. It teaches us resolve to overcome suffering, and to know the pleasure without the pain would be meaningless. How would you know pleasure without the painful counterpoint?
Suffering does teach resolve and patience and other such virtues, you are correct. However, there is a key point you miss, my friend. You are arguing that all of this suffering and pain is a good thing, because after it we are enlightened, and therefore it is worth it. You miss one very important point, however. You are speaking about suffering that is a positive thing, to teach humans who then die and go to the spiritual world in which there is no suffering. Is this not so?
Yes, it is so. However, I feel as if you are still missing the point. Suffering and pain, even if not pleasant, are not bad things in and of themselves. They are, as I said, valuable teachers, of which we learn. We do not enjoy suffering, but we are still given something by suffering, and that makes suffering worth something.
I hear you. You are saying that suffering and pain may be terrible and are not good things themselves, yet from them come resolve and character and other such virtues. That is undeniable. However, you are forgetting that the whole reason for all of this suffering, as you say, is for growth and learning, right? For human spirits to gain wisdom and knowledge, is that correct?
I am glad that you understand. Yes, I am arguing that suffering and pain are not inherently bad, as they are teachers in the growth and wisdom of spiritual beings. The suffering is not something to be enjoyed, as it is not pleasant, but it certainly comes with a positive aspect, one which makes it as a whole a good thing. After all, the suffering makes us all who we are, makes us stronger of mind and character.
It is true, suffering makes us stronger of mind and character, but who is this good for if the one who is suffering dies and goes to the spiritual world, of which you said has no suffering? In whose favor is this suffering and death? You are saying that suffering is good and that death is good, but the one who dies ceases to exist in the material after death and goes to a place of no suffering. So who is this suffering and death in the favor of? If suffering and death is the very way of humanity, does God in fact love humanity?
Yes, I have said that suffering is good and useful, and indeed suffering is useful to us while we are in the flesh. But I have also said that suffering does not make the individual who experiences it happy, and that is as it should be, as we are taught by such unpleasant sensations. However, I will state again what is so important for you to remember. Suffering, in and of itself, does not make a person happy.
So suffering does not make the individual happy, correct? But I think you are not understanding my point. Suffering may teach lessons which ultimately enrich the human spirit in the material, but when we die we go to the spiritual, in which there is no suffering. So why does the human body suffer and die if we were made to exist in a place of no suffering? Why would God create the human spirit to learn from suffering and then send it to a place where there is no suffering? Who is that good for?
Once a person dies, their mind and spirit do go to the spiritual world, a place of no physical suffering. However, there is still emotional suffering. Even in the spiritual, a soul can still regret, feel pains of the heart and sorrow. There is no physical suffering, that is true, but there is still such things as the heartbreak and despair. Even in the spiritual, we feel pain of the mind and heart.
So let me understand you correctly. The human spirit is created in a material body through its interaction with the spiritual world. It lives in the material where there is suffering, but there is the potential for growth and learning from this suffering. It dies and then ascends to a spiritual world, a world that you describe as having no physical suffering but rather emotional suffering, and in this spiritual world you can also still learn spiritual lessons. Would you say this summarizes your beliefs?
Yes, indeed, your summary of my beliefs is correct. However, I would still maintain that suffering, physical pain, is not something to be desired, but it is an unpleasant but useful tool. Like you said, even in the world of spirit, the tools of suffering remain, allowing for the continuing growth and improvement of souls.
So let me get this straight one last time. This life in the material world, in the fleshy human body, it is a trial by fire and an act of faith, with suffering and physical pain to teach us lessons. We are then eventually sent to the spiritual world, once having suffered from illness, old age, and death. While in the spiritual world you say that we still experience suffering, and so you claim that we continue to learn from suffering even in the spiritual world. Am I understanding you correctly?
A trial of fire, as you describe it, is perhaps overly negative, but I agree with your statement. Yes, even in the spiritual world, suffering still exists, as does lessons to be learned by it. No matter whether it be the physical or the spiritual, suffering and the lessons to be learned from it will always exist together.
So are you saying that in the spiritual world, a world without flesh and material, people still suffer even though there is no need? What you are describing is pointless in my honest opinion. You have said that the suffering we face is not pleasant nor enjoyable, yet it is important for spiritual growth. If spiritual growth is so important, then why did God create the human spirit and the suffering of the human spirit instead of just creating the spiritual world, in which all can be at peace? Why go through suffering to get to peace?
To experience physical suffering, to learn from it, is the reason for the human body. A life of pain and lessons learned from it is the purpose of the human body. It is not pointless. It teaches resilience, shows a need to overcome. There is no growth without struggle. The world cannot exist with nothing but peace. It requires balance.
What you say leads to the logical conclusion that God loves struggle more than he loves people. Then he says that he is good, yes, but he brings people into suffering for the sole purpose of building character, so much so that in the afterlife, in which he claims is his kingdom, people continue to suffer even though there is no need.
I understand how my beliefs could be perceived to be cruel. However, I would not say this is so. God does not love suffering, but growth. As I said, the spiritual world experiences a different form of suffering than the physical. The suffering in the spiritual is not pleasant, but it is still useful. The physical and the spiritual are contrasts to one another. One cannot exist without the other.
Suffering is only useful to humans, correct? So, God has a choice between creating humanity on one hand, humanity which must struggle and suffer, or creating a perfect spirit-only world on the other. So what you are saying is that God chose to create humanity and give them free will, and all the while allowing them to suffer to get to peace. Would you agree with me that God had to choose between creating humans and creating a spirit-only world? If you agree, then you must agree that he created humanity over a perfect world, because he favors struggle over peace.
Yes, I would say that suffering is only useful to humans indeed. However, you are incorrect in stating that God had a choice between creating humanity and creating a perfect world. For God did not create Earth. Humanity itself, through a collective will, created Earth, the physical, as a tool and a plane for which to grow and learn from physical suffering. Even God could not create a perfect universe, for it is humanity itself that created this existence.
But isn't God the creator of human spirits? Did God not create humans and then put them into the flesh? How does God not create humanity when he literally creates the spirit? Did God not create the universe and the earth? Was it not God who created everything? Even if he did not literally sculpt the earth in 6 days, he still created the spirits who then went on to create the earth, so God still created humanity. He could have simply created the spirits in paradise. There would be no struggle, no need to create the material.
Humans are created by God, yes, but the world of matter and physical pain is not. God did not make a perfect place, for the need to grow is an inherent part of the human condition. And as much as suffering is unpleasant, it is necessary to improve and to learn. Even in an imagined world in which there is no material, there still remains such things as the heartache, the grief, and regrets of the mind.
In a paradise to live in for eternity with no suffering.